Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Bima Matalegra from class 5.2 English. Okay, I wanna explain about definition of interpreting. Okay, interpreting is a translation activity in which one produces first and final translation on the basis of one-time exposure to an expression in a short language. The most common two modes of interpreting are simultaneous interpreting, which is done at the time of the exposure to the short language, and consecutive interpreting, which is done at breaks to this exposure. Interpreting is an ancient human activity which predates the invention of writing. However, the original of the professions of interpreting date back to less than a century ago. Here are 7 key types of interpreting you can miss. Simultaneous interpretation. Simultaneous interpreters translate the speech in their head and deliver it in the preferred language instantly with a minimum delay. In a matter of milliseconds, it requires immediate comprehension from the audience and speaker as the original speech continues with no interruption. Remote as simultaneous interpretation. Here easy. Simultaneous interpretation is the most challenging mode for interpreters. They have minimal time, but it doesn't stop them from staying in the same tone and register as the speakers. As stressful as it would look in the long term. Simultaneous interpretation actually contributes to the interpreter's ability to perform dual tasks. Thus, multitasking, you might not see the change immediately, but you are likely to benefit from them in the future. Consecutive interpretation mode relies heavily on taking structured notes when used at one-side events. Consecutive interpretation can only occur if an interpreter stands in a close proximity to the presenter. While the speaker delivers a speech, the interpreter remains silent for a few sentences. The original speaker has to take a pause every few sentences as the interpreter constantly interrupts the speech to deliver it in the target language. Whispered interpretation is also called chuchote whispering in French. Whispering interpreter interprets the message in their head and whispers it to the client. The interpreter leans over and communicates the message in a client's favorite language in a quiet voice, just like simultaneous interpretation mode. Whispered interpreting carries the challenge of immediate understanding. You have to listen, understand, translate, and deliver the speech at the same time. Really interpretation. Really interpretation is your best mode when there are no interpreters available for a particular language. For example, if a Finnish to Latvian interpreters are missing, a mediating process could take place. In this case, a Finnish interpreter will interpret the speech into a more commonly spoken language, English. Another interpreter will provide English to Latvian interpretation, thus governing the really spoken language. Lesson interpretation. Lesson is a process stabilized as a close working relationship between people or organizations. It is the most informal mode of interpretation that can look some accuracy when compared to consecutive interpretation. Word-to-word interpretation is not required here. Travel interpretation, also known as escort interpretation, is a mode of interpretation that stands out from a cultural perspective. Travel interpreter accompanies the client to the previously agreed destination and helps them overcome the language barrier through interpretation. Over the phone interpretation, OPI is one of the remote interpretation service providers tend to operate in more than 100 languages. Governmental institutions often use OPI on occupations related to healthcare or public concern in countries like the United States. Okay, thank you for watching my video. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.